I remember the first time I broke one of the rules, and how quickly I learned that the ocean doesn't forgive mistakes. The surface may look calm, but beneath it are shadows that twist, waiting for a chance to reach you. I work as a retrieval diver, sent into sunken wrecks where most would never dare to go. People don't talk about what happens down there, but we have rules, 11 of them, and breaking even one could mean you don't come back. They aren't just for safety, they're for survival. I should know, because I've seen what happens when someone forgets. Even now I can still see the way their face looked in the water, and I'll never forget what followed. When I first joined the retrieval crew, I thought the rules were just grim traditions, passed down from older divers to scare the rookies. The one that stood out most was Rule 1, never look the bodies in the eyes. It sounded almost childish, as though corpses had some kind of supernatural pull. During training I remember asking why, and the older divers just looked at me in silence, their faces drawn tight like they were remembering something they wished they hadn't seen. One finally said, "You'll understand the first time you don't listen." That was all they gave me. No explanation, no logic, just a warning that sat in the back of my head like an echo I couldn't ignore. My first real assignment was a downed yacht off the coast, a sleek white vessel that had gone under after a storm. The sea was unusually still that morning, its surface flat and glassy like it was hiding secrets beneath. I remember slipping into the water and feeling the shift immediately, the silence pressing down, the cold wrapping around me, and the faint hum of the boat's hull as it disappeared into darkness. As I descended, I kept reminding myself of the rules, repeating them like prayers. But when I reached the shattered deck, I saw her, the first body, a woman, floating upright with her hair drifting like seaweed around her face. My instincts screamed to look away, to keep my eyes fixed anywhere else, but I felt my gaze drifting toward her. That was when I remembered Rule 1 again, and I snapped my head aside so fast I nearly lost my balance in the water. It's hard to explain how strong the pull is when you're face to face with the dead. There's something in the water that makes them seem alive, just for a moment, like their eyes could open and meet yours at any second. I thought it was just nerves, but as I reached for her arm to secure the harness, I felt resistance. Not physical, but something in me, a hesitation that dug into my chest. My hand shook as I clipped the strap around her, and I swore I felt her head turn slightly, just a fraction, as though she was watching me. I didn't check. I didn't want to know. I just followed the procedure, tightening the line, giving the signal to the crew above, and praying they pulled her up quickly. When I surfaced, the older divers didn't cheer or pat me on the back the way I thought they would. They just scanned my face carefully, as if searching for something. "Did you look?" one of them asked in a flat voice. My throat tightened, and I shook my head. "Good," he said, his tone clipped. "Don't ever think you can. Some things don't forgive eye contact." That night, I lay awake in my bunk, trying to shake the image of her floating there, almost watching me. The ocean pressed into my dreams, filling them with pale faces suspended in the dark. Even when I closed my eyes, I saw them opening theirs. The second retrieval I did was with another rookie, a guy named Harris. He was cocky, the kind of diver who thought rules were just meant to be bent. We were sent into a wrecked fishing trawler that had been torn apart in a storm, and the inside was twisted with nets and broken beams. As we moved deeper, I saw Harris pause. His flashlight beam was fixed on a shape in the corner, half hidden by a collapsed door. I didn't want to look, but curiosity got the better of me for a second, and I caught a glimpse, a man wedged in the wreckage, his face pale and bloated, eyes half open in the dark water. Harris moved closer, ignoring the tension in the line we'd been trained to keep between us. I tapped my signal for caution, but he waved me off. Then I saw him do it, his head tilted, just slightly, and his mask shifted like he was locking eyes with the corpse. In that moment, the air in my tank felt heavier. My chest burned, my pulse raced, and I wanted to scream into my regulator. Harris froze in place, his body rigid, his hands floating in front of him like he was suspended by invisible strings. I yanked on the tether, trying to pull him back, but he wouldn't move. His faceplate fogged as his breathing grew uneven, and then he started shaking his head violently, as though trying to break free from something only he could see. The body in the wreck shifted. I swear it did. Its arm moved with the current, but the way it drifted, it didn't feel natural. It felt like it was reaching for him. I hauled Harris out by force, pulling until my arms ached and my lungs felt like they'd burst. We finally reached the surface, and he collapsed onto the deck, ripping his mask off and gasping for air. The others crowded around, but he wouldn't look at anyone. His eyes darted everywhere, wide and bloodshot, like he was still staring into the water. When someone asked him what happened, he just whispered, "It looked back." He never dove again after that. In fact, a week later, he left the crew entirely. Nobody asked him where he went. That was the moment I stopped doubting the rules. Rule 1: never look the bodies in the eyes. It wasn't about superstition. It wasn't about fear. It was survival, because whatever happens when you do, it doesn't let go. Even now, years later, I sometimes dream about Harris, still underwater, still staring at that pale face in the dark. And sometimes I wonder if maybe he never really made it back at all. The night after Harris quit, the crew gathered in the mess room. Nobody mentioned him by name, but the silence at the table said enough. The older divers didn't mourn his absence. They treated it like the ocean had already claimed him, even though his body was still walking around somewhere on land. That was when they drilled the next lesson into me, repeating it with the same grave tone they'd used before. Rule 2: always tie yourself to the line before entering the wreck. They said it wasn't just for navigation or safety. It was a lifeline, a thread that separated you from getting lost in the dark. At first I thought it was common sense. In training, we practiced tethering ourselves before exploring wrecks, using thick lines that connected back to the surface. But the older divers weren't talking about accidents or disorientation. They told stories in half-whispers about men who cut their lines and vanished, their lights seen flickering in the distance long after they should have run out of air. The ocean was too vast, too empty, for anyone to wander alone and still return. The line wasn't just rope, it was a barrier. Without it, you risked being pulled into places you weren't meant to find. My first test of Rule 2 came on a stormy afternoon. A fishing vessel had capsized 3 miles off the coast, its hull torn open by rocks. The water churned gray under the clouds, and the waves slapped against our boat with a rhythm that set my nerves on edge. When I geared up and clipped myself to the line, I felt a strange comfort in the tug of resistance as I descended. The world narrowed to the glow of my flashlight, the pulse of my breathing, and the faint vibration of the rope against my belt. But as I reached the jagged tear in the hull, I realized something was wrong. The line was taut, stretched unnaturally, as if something below was pulling at it. I froze, gripping the rope tight. It shivered in my hands like a live thing, tugging with uneven jerks. For a moment, I thought maybe the current had caught it, dragging it against sharp metal. But then it went slack all at once, and I felt the pull from deeper inside the wreck. Something wanted me to follow. Against every instinct, I stepped through the broken hull, letting the line drag behind me. The interior was a labyrinth of collapsed beams and floating debris, the walls groaning softly as if the wreck were alive. My light swept across a chair, a dangling wire, the pale hand of a body half pinned under rubble. I kept moving, but the rope led me further than I intended, drawing me deeper into the maze. It was only when I reached the cabin door that I realized the rope had looped itself around the frame, coiling like a snake. My chest tightened. I hadn't done that. I knew my knots, and this wasn't mine. With shaking fingers I tried to unhook it, but every time I loosened one loop, another tightened. My light flickered, and in the reflection of the shattered cabin window, I thought I saw movement, something pale sliding through the water just behind me. My lungs screamed for air, and I yanked hard on the rope, signaling the surface team. The line went rigid instantly, pulling me backward so fast I scraped my leg against rusted metal. I didn't care. I let them drag me out, up and up until the gray light of the storm split above me. When I surfaced, my hands were trembling so badly I couldn't unclasp the harness. The crew hauled me onto the deck, their faces pale as they saw the rope. It was frayed, shredded in places, as though something had been gnawing at it. One of the older divers leaned close, his voice low enough that only I could hear. "Never fight the line. If it pulls, it's because you're not the one holding it anymore." He cut the rope then and there, tossing the ruined end into the sea. Nobody spoke the rest of the day. Weeks later, I learned why Rule 2 mattered most. We were assigned to a cargo ship that had sunk in deeper waters, its containers scattered like bones across the ocean floor. I was partnered with an experienced diver named Calloway, a man with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue. He didn't like rookies, and he made sure I knew it. As we descended, he muttered over the comms about wasted time, about how he didn't need anyone slowing him down. I almost told him to remember Rule 2, but I didn't. I figured he knew it better than me. That was my mistake. Inside the ship, the halls stretched endlessly, filled with floating crates and drifting silt. I kept my eyes on the rope, feeling its weight tug gently as I moved. Calloway, on the other hand, unclipped himself as soon as we were inside. I saw him do it. He thought I wasn't watching, but I caught the gleam of his knife as he sliced the tether free. He shot me a smirk through his mask, the kind that said he didn't believe in ghost stories. "Don't worry, kid," his voice crackled over the comm. "I don't need a leash." At first he seemed fine, moving with confidence through the wreck, his light sweeping over collapsed stairways and shattered railings. But the deeper he went, the stranger his movements became. He stopped signaling me, drifting ahead without care, his beam vanishing around corners before I could follow. I tugged on my line nervously, grounding myself, while his silhouette grew smaller in the haze. Then I heard him gasp. It wasn't over the comm, it was muffled, distant, like it came from the water itself. I swam faster, my chest burning, but when I turned the corner he was gone. No bubbles, no light, no trace, just empty dark corridors stretching in every direction. I panicked, fumbling with the rope, yanking hard for the surface. The line pulled me back, guiding me like a parent, dragging a child by the arm. My flashlight flickered across the walls, and for the briefest second, I saw something move in the silt. A figure, maybe, pale and formless, slipping just out of sight. I didn't chase it. I let the line drag me out, lungs aching, heart hammering. When I broke the surface, the others pulled me onto the deck, their eyes darting to the water behind me. Calloway never came back. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that he hadn't drowned. The way he'd vanished, it was too sudden, too silent. Some of the crew whispered that the wreck itself had taken him, that the corridors below weren't always the same. They said the line didn't just keep you tethered to the boat, it tethered you to the world above. Without it, you could wander somewhere else, somewhere you couldn't escape. I didn't want to believe it, but when I closed my eyes, I swore I still heard his voice, faint and muffled, calling from the dark water beneath the hull. And sometimes, when the waves were still, I could feel a tug on the boat, like someone below was trying to climb their way back up. The night after Calloway vanished, I sat awake, listening to the ocean. Normally the sea is alive with noise. The crash of waves, the hiss of wind, the low groan of shifting tides. But that night, everything was muted, like the water was holding its breath. The older divers warned me about this, long before, though I had never experienced it for myself. They called it the stillness, and they spoke of it with the same haunted tone they used when repeating the others. Rule 3, never dive. When the sea is silent, they said silence meant something was listening, waiting for you to step inside. At first I thought it was just superstition. After all, weather changes, winds die down, and seas calm. It made sense for the world to go quiet sometimes. But the more I listened, the more unnatural it felt. The waves didn't crash against the hull. The ropes didn't creak against the mast. Even the gulls that usually circled above were gone. leaving only a heavy emptiness. It wasn't calm, it was void. I tried to shake it off, convincing myself that it was all in my head, until the captain gave the order to prepare for a night dive. My stomach nodded instantly. I remembered Rule 3 and felt my skin crawl. I tried to object, saying the silence wasn't right, but the captain just raised an eyebrow. "The sea doesn't wait for your comfort," he said, his voice sharp. Some of the older divers exchanged uneasy looks, but none of them spoke up. Orders were orders, and we didn't have the luxury of ignoring them. Harris had been reckless. Calloway had been arrogant. I didn't want to be next. Still, when I strapped on my gear, every click of the buckles felt like sealing my own coffin. I couldn't hear the waves. I couldn't even hear the wind. Just the soft rasp of my breath inside my mask. Descending into that silence was worse than anything I had felt before. Usually the ocean hums with faint noises, the pop of pressure, the distant rumble of currents, the steady thrum of your own bubbles. But that night, even the sound of my regulator seemed swallowed before it reached my ears. My flashlight cut through thick water that looked heavier than usual, the beam trembling across the seabed. My tether line tugged faintly, grounding me, but every instinct screamed at me to go back. It wasn't just fear. It was the knowledge that I had already broken Rule 3, and there was no undoing it. The wreck we were assigned to was an old freighter, rusted and collapsed in on itself, like a skeleton. As I approached the twisted hull, I noticed something strange. The silt didn't drift the way it normally did. It hung suspended in the water, unmoving, like dust frozen in glass. My light caught the outlines of crates, metal beams, and even fish suspended mid-motion, their fins stiff, their eyes fixed. At first I thought they were dead, but as I passed one, its tail flicked once, slow and deliberate, before going still again. My breath hitched, and I nearly bolted, but the line tugged at me, reminding me I wasn't alone. Inside the wreck, the silence deepened. The beams of my light reached only a few feet before dissolving into nothingness. I glanced back at the line, gripping it tightly, when I realized the faint vibrations I usually felt through the rope were gone. The surface team wasn't there, or maybe the rope wasn't connected anymore. My heart hammered, and I pulled hard, expecting resistance. Instead, the rope slid loosely through my glove, as if it led nowhere. Panic clawed at my throat, and I turned to retrace my path, but the corridor behind me was gone. The walls had shifted. The wreck was different now, reshaped, like it had been waiting for me to enter. That was when I saw them. Faces, pale and still, suspended in the corners of the wreck like shadows carved into water. They weren't the bodies of the drowned. They were older, sharper, their eyes dark voids that seemed to swallow my light. My training screamed at me to remember Rule 1, but this wasn't the same. These weren't corpses. These were watchers. They lined the walls in silence, unmoving, but I could feel them leaning closer the longer I stared. My breath echoed too loud in my mask, and I clutched the rope, praying it would lead me out. I don't know how long I wandered in that silence. The corridors bent on themselves, stairs leading upward that circled back down, doors that opened into the same room I had just left. Every path twisted until I didn't know which way was real. The faces followed, appearing at the edges of my light, never moving, never blinking, but always closer when I turned. I was trapped in their world, and I knew why the rule existed. The silence wasn't the absence of sound. It was the ocean handing itself over to something else. Something that didn't want me there. Finally, the rope jerked. It was faint at first, a gentle pull, then stronger, like someone was yanking me back toward reality. I didn't hesitate. I clutched the line and let it drag me, ignoring the way the walls shifted, ignoring the faces that seemed to ripple in the dark. The silence thickened as I rose, pressing against me like hands trying to keep me down. My lungs burned, my vision swam, but I didn't stop. When I broke the surface, sound returned in a rush. The crash of waves, the shouts of the crew, the slap of water against the hull. I tore my mask off and gasped, feeling the weight of the silence finally lift. But the crew was staring at me strangely. They said I had only been gone 8 minutes, yet my tank was almost empty. One of the older divers leaned close, whispering so no one else could hear. "You're lucky. Some don't come back when it's silent. They stay down there walking halls that never end." His words chilled me more than the dive itself. That night, I tried to sleep, but when I closed my eyes, I didn't dream of water. I dreamed of corridors of rust and faces in the dark, waiting for me to return. And sometimes, when the sea is too calm, I can hear the silence creeping back in, like it's calling me to finish what I started. After the night of the silence, I thought the worst was behind me. I followed the rules more carefully than ever, never straying, never second-guessing. But the ocean doesn't forgive complacency. A few days later, the captain assigned us to a recovery near the cliffs, where a passenger ferry had capsized. The storm that brought it down had passed, leaving the water deceptively calm. I geared up with the others, my chest tight with dread, when one of the older divers leaned close and reminded me of the next warning. Rule 4. Never follow the lights below the surface. His eyes were sharp when he said it, and something in his voice told me this wasn't superstition. At first I assumed he meant stray flashlight beams or lost equipment. In wrecks, beams of light can scatter, bend, or reflect in ways that confuse the mind. But the way he spoke made me think of something else, something deliberate. I tried not to dwell on it as I slipped into the water, the cold swallowing me whole. The ferry loomed in the distance, a hulking shadow tilted on its side, windows shattered, and hull torn open. My tether line pulled faintly, steady and rhythmic, the only thread keeping me grounded as I approached. The silence of the last dive haunted me still, but tonight the sea groaned and shifted like it was restless. That should have comforted me, but it didn't. Inside the wreck, the ferry's halls stretched long and narrow, seats overturned, luggage drifting like forgotten memories. My light swept across corridors painted in rust, every shadow twisting with movement. Then I saw it, a glow in the distance, faint and flickering, like a lantern swaying gently in the dark. My first thought was that another diver had gone ahead, their beam cutting through the water, but no one had entered before me. The crew never risked splitting us up like that. I froze, clutching the rope, and remembered Rule 4 again. I knew what it meant now. That wasn't a diver's light. The glow pulsed faintly, drawing my eyes against my will. It wasn't steady the way flashlights should be. It wavered, as if it were alive, breathing in the water. My instincts screamed to stay still, but curiosity clawed at me. I wanted to follow, to see where it led. It didn't feel like my thought. It felt placed there, pushing gently against my mind. My chest tightened, and I gripped the line so hard my knuckles ached, forcing myself to stay tethered. But the glow shifted closer, as if it sensed my hesitation. It hovered in the corridor, swaying like it was inviting me in. I tore my eyes away, focusing on the rope, but even then, the glow reflected in the corners of my mask. It seeped into my vision, no matter where I turned. My breathing quickened, bubbles rushing past my ears. Then I heard it, not through my comms, not through the water, but inside my head. A voice, soft and distant, calling my name. It was impossible. No sound should travel like that. I shut my eyes, trying to drown it out, but the voice grew clearer, insistent, like someone whispering just behind my shoulder. "Come closer," it said, the syllables stretching unnaturally, pulling at me. I nearly unclipped the rope. My hand drifted toward the latch before I realized what I was doing. Panic jolted me back, and I shook violently, forcing myself to signal the surface. The rope jerked in reply, steady and strong, pulling me back toward safety. But the light followed. It slid along the corridor as I retreated, pulsing brighter with every kick of my fins. I didn't look at it directly, but I could feel its glow pressing against my mask, threatening to bleed inside. My lungs burned, my vision blurred, but I didn't let go of the rope. When I finally burst out of the wreck, the light vanished instantly, like it had never been there at all. The crew pulled me aboard, my body trembling so violently I could hardly stand. They didn't ask what I saw. They already knew. One of the divers pressed a towel into my hands, his voice low and sharp. "You looked at it, didn't you?" I didn't answer, but my silence was enough. He nodded grimly. "You were lucky. Some follow the lights all the way down. We don't find their bodies, just their gear, scattered on the seabed." His words lodged deep in my mind, colder than the water itself. That night, I dreamed of flickering lanterns drifting through endless corridors, each one leading deeper and deeper, and I woke gasping with the taste of salt in my mouth. The next dive, I saw it again. Not inside a wreck this time, but drifting freely in the open sea, a pale glow pulsing far below, where no diver should ever go. I turned away instantly, forcing myself to focus on my task, but even from the corner of my eye, I could see it waiting. That was when I realized the worst part. It wasn't random, it was following me. The light never left me. Even when I tried to forget, even when I forced my eyes away, I could feel it hovering somewhere in the deep, patient and deliberate. It wasn't long after that, the captain gave us a nighttime assignment. A trawler had gone down just offshore, and the local authorities wanted bodies recovered before morning. The older divers grew restless, their faces grim as we prepared. One of them stopped me as I checked my gear. His hand gripped my shoulder firmly, and his voice was a low growl. "Rule 5. Never surface alone after midnight." He didn't explain further, but the way his gaze lingered told me he had seen the consequences firsthand. At first I thought the rule was about visibility. Darkness makes the ocean a labyrinth, and surfacing alone could mean missing the boat or drifting away in the current. But the way the divers avoided my eyes told me it was something worse. Midnight carried a weight at sea. Fishermen spoke of it in hushed tones, as if the ocean itself changed when the clock struck 12. I tried not to think about it as I descended, the black water swallowing me whole. My flashlight cut through the dark, beams dancing across twisted nets and broken wood, while the steady pull of the rope guided me deeper. The wreck itself wasn't remarkable, just another broken vessel claimed by the tide. But as I clipped harnesses onto the first body, I felt the weight of time pressing close. My watch glowed faintly in my mask, the hands ticking toward midnight with unsettling precision. I tried to work faster, my hands trembling as I secured straps, but the water around me grew heavier, slower, as though resisting my movements. The silence of the last dive haunted me, and I prayed that at least tonight the sea would keep its voice. Yet beneath the sound of my own breath, I thought I heard something else, faint ripples, like whispers threading through the water. By the time I reached the second body, the watch face read 11:58. My chest tightened. I didn't want to be below when the hands crossed 12, but the tether line tugged, signaling I still had one more retrieval before surfacing. I clipped the harness quickly, every muscle tense as I gave the surface signal. My rope pulled in reply, and I started to ascend, bubbles streaming past my face. That was when the water stilled. My body froze mid-kick, as if I had broken through a threshold. My watch ticked once more, and then it was midnight. The ocean went quiet. I wasn't alone anymore. At first I thought it was another diver, the faint silhouette rising beside me, its light glowing faintly in the dark. Relief almost washed over me, until I noticed the details. The glow wasn't from a flashlight. It was pale, wavering, just like the lantern light I had seen before. And the figure wasn't swimming, it was drifting, its arms hanging limply, its face turned upward, hair swirling like seaweed around its head. My stomach dropped. It was a body, rising alongside me. A body that wasn't strapped, wasn't tethered, but followed at the same pace as though carried by invisible hands. Every instinct screamed to surface, but Rule 5 thundered in my mind. I couldn't surface alone. If I broke it, I didn't know what would be waiting for me above. My lungs burned as I slowed my ascent, glancing around desperately for another diver. but there was no one, only me and the drifting body. My rope tugged sharply, urging me upward, but I held back. My chest felt like it would explode, the weight of the ocean crushing tighter with each passing second. Still I stayed, forcing myself to wait, praying for someone, anyone, to break the surface with me. The body turned slowly, its face drifting into my light. My heart seized. The eyes weren't closed, they were open, wide and pale, fixed directly on me. I snapped my head away instantly, the warning of Rule 1 slamming into me as panic clawed through my chest. I tried not to look, tried to focus on the rope, but in the corners of my vision, I saw the body inch closer. Its movements weren't natural, jerks and shudders, like something pulling it by strings. My lungs screamed, spots dancing across my vision, but I didn't ascend. Not until I felt another hand brush against my arm. I turned sharply, relief flooding me as I saw another diver emerge from the dark. His flashlight beam cut through the water, steady and strong, tether rope trailing behind him. He gave me the hand signal to surface, and I nearly wept with gratitude. Together we rose, the drifting body sliding below us, fading into the black. The instant my head broke the surface, sound returned. The crash of waves, the shouts of the crew, the hiss of wind through the rigging. I ripped my mask off and gasped, gulping air like it was the sweetest thing I'd ever tasted. The diver surfaced beside me, silent as he climbed the ladder. I followed, trembling so badly my legs nearly buckled on deck. The others crowded close, helping strip my gear, but when I looked up, my stomach turned cold. The deck was empty. No one else had surfaced with me, no diver had returned. The crew stared, their faces pale, their voices hushed. "You came up alone," one of them whispered. My throat tightened, bile rising as I shook my head. "No," I said, my voice breaking. "Someone was with me. He touched my arm, he surfaced with me." The older diver's face drained of color. He leaned close, his words sharp as a blade. "If you surfaced alone, it wasn't one of us." That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I shut my eyes I saw the drifting body, its pale eyes fixed on mine. And when I looked to the water, I swore I saw ripples breaking the surface, just beyond the boat, as though something else had followed me back. Something that wasn't supposed to leave the ocean at all. I couldn't shake the feeling of that hand on my arm. Even hours later, lying in my bunk, with the boat rocking gently beneath me, I could still feel the pressure of fingers gripping tight, urging me to surface. But every diver swore no one had been with me. I kept telling myself, maybe I was wrong. Maybe exhaustion had played tricks. But deep down I knew better. Something surfaced beside me that night, something that didn't belong to us. And when I finally drifted into uneasy sleep, I dreamed of pale shapes climbing over the railing, dripping seawater across the deck. The captain woke us at dawn with another assignment. The trawler wreck had yielded only 2 bodies, but the rest remained inside. We had to go back. I tried to protest, my chest still tight with dread, but the old diver only shook his head and muttered the words that froze me. "Rule 6: never bring anything back from the water." His eyes stayed locked on me, as if he already suspected I'd broken it somehow, though I swore I hadn't taken a thing. Still, the warning stuck in my skull as I checked my gear, my fingers trembling with every buckle and strap. The descent was calmer than the night before. Light filtered faintly from above, and visibility stretched just enough to make the wreck visible from a distance. Rusted metal jutted at odd angles, nets drifted like torn curtains, and schools of fish darted through gaps in the broken hull. We worked slowly, tying ropes to bodies, signaling to the crew above, yet as I maneuvered through the wreck, I felt an odd tug at my suit. I thought it was snagged on debris, but when I twisted to free it, I saw nothing, only the faint shimmer of something glinting in the silt. A piece of metal, small and golden, half buried in the sand. It looked like jewelry, a locket maybe, its chain tangled in seaweed. My gloved hand hovered over it for a moment, temptation gnawing at me. It would be easy to slip into my pocket, easy to bring back as proof that I hadn't imagined the figure that surfaced with me. But then the old man's words returned. Rule 6. Never bring anything back from the water. My chest tightened as I pulled my hand back. Still, the locket didn't stay where it was. When I turned to secure another body, I felt the faint weight of something slide into the pouch of my gear belt. My heart stopped. I hadn't touched it, yet it was with me now. I nearly panicked right there, bubbles bursting around my mask as I pawed frantically at the pouch. My fingers closed around cold metal, chain coiled like a serpent in my palm. I tried to drop it, but the thing clung stubbornly to my glove, as though magnetized. Desperate, I forced it into the sand, grinding it down until it finally slipped free. My chest heaved with effort, every breath louder than the last. But when I looked up, the wreck seemed different. The fish were gone, the water stilled, and in the jagged opening of the hull, a pale face peered out at me, lips parted in a sound I couldn't hear. I bolted back toward the tether line, ignoring procedure, ignoring the bodies still left below. My rope jerked hard as I gave the emergency signal, and the surface crew began hauling me up. But halfway to the top, something snagged me again, not on debris this time, but on the chain. The locket dangled from my belt, as if it had never left. My blood ran cold. I tried tearing at it, yanking it free, but the harder I fought, the tighter it seemed to bind. Only when my partner diver appeared, eyes wide behind his mask, did it loosen. His hand shot out, pointing furiously at the locket, shaking his head violently. I understood. He knew. He had seen it before. He gestured for me to drop it, but the chain had twined around my wrist now, biting deep into my glove. I wanted to scream. Together we forced it free, tearing at the fabric, until my glove ripped. The locket drifted down, golden chain spiraling like a lure into the abyss. Instantly the pressure eased, the water moving again, fish darting nervously through the wreck. We didn't wait. We surfaced as fast as safety allowed, breaking into the air with gasping breaths. But when I climbed aboard, the others avoided my eyes. They knew I had touched something I shouldn't have. That night, I hid in my bunk, clutching my bandaged hand. The chain had left deep grooves, angry red welts that burned as though the salt still lingered inside the skin. I swore I hadn't meant to break Rule 6, but the sea didn't seem to care about intention. The rule wasn't just warning, it was law, and I had come dangerously close to carrying something out of the water that wanted to come. When I finally drifted into uneasy sleep, I dreamed of the locket again, but this time it wasn't under the waves. It lay on my nightstand, dripping with seawater, its clasp slowly opening. I woke to the sound of water dripping on the floor. My heart hammered as I sat up, scanning the room. Nothing, only the steady creak of the boat. But when I looked at my bandaged hand, the grooves had deepened overnight, twisting into shapes I didn't recognize. Shapes that looked less like wounds and more like writing. I covered it quickly, praying no one else would notice. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling that the sea had marked me, claimed me, and that the next time I descended, it wouldn't let me return so easily. The captain announced another dive for dawn. I should have felt relief that we weren't finished, that I had a chance to redeem myself. Instead, dread hollowed my chest. If Rule 6 was this unforgiving, I couldn't imagine what the others would demand. And worse, I couldn't stop wondering what would happen if the locket found its way back to me again. Because I knew, deep down, that it would. The morning dive left me drained, my body heavier than the tank strapped to my back. I couldn't stop thinking about the marks on my hand, now hidden under fresh bandages. No one asked about them, though I caught the old diver's gaze lingering on me too long, his lips pressed tight as if he already knew. By the time the sun began to dip, painting the sea in molten orange, I wanted nothing more than to sleep. But the captain called us together, his voice low, his words like gravel. Rule 7, never dive alone after sunset. He said it as if reminding us of something obvious, though the way his eyes cut to me made it feel like a warning meant only for me. That night, We were supposed to anchor near the wreck and wait for better daylight. Yet the storm rolled in without warning, waves slamming against the hull, lightning scattering across the horizon. The radio cut in and out, static swallowing the captain's curses. Then came the call. One of the ropes tied to a recovered body had snapped. The corpse was drifting, still tethered to our rig, pulling dangerously against the side of the boat. "We need it back," the captain barked, but no one moved. Every diver knew what the rule meant. We weren't supposed to dive now, not after sunset, and certainly not alone. The silence stretched until the captain's eyes found me. I felt the weight of his stare, heavier than the storm itself. "You're the lightest," he muttered. "Quickest in the water, just clip the line back, nothing more." My chest tightened as I glanced at the others, but none met my eyes. The old diver shook his head once, almost imperceptibly, his lips shaping the words I already knew, Rule 7. But the captain's hand clapped my shoulder, iron strong, leaving me no choice. Within minutes I was suited again, mask fogging from the heat of my breath. Sliding into the black water was like sinking into tar. The storm above churned the surface, but below was still, suffocatingly still. My light cut through only a few feet ahead, revealing fragments of rope, drifting seaweed, and nothing else. Every movement sent shivers through me. I clutched the tether line, following it down until the broken corpse came into view. It hung suspended in the current, limbs swaying unnaturally, its face turned toward me though it should have been slack. I told myself it was only the water's pull, but its eyes were open. I forced myself closer, fumbling with the clip in trembling hands. "Just secure it," I whispered into my mask, as if speaking would make the task easier. My light flickered across the corpse's chest, revealing something clasped there, something small, golden, dangling from a chain. My stomach twisted. The locket, the same one I had buried in the sand, the same one I had torn from my wrist. It glimmered against the dead flesh, as if it had always belonged there. My grip slipped on the clip, bubbles rushing past my mask as I fought the urge to back away. I remembered then that I was alone. The rule wasn't just about the time of day, it was about vulnerability. Rule 7, never dive alone. After sunset, the water seemed to pulse with the weight of that warning. I felt the shift before I saw it, the shadow moving in the dark beyond my light. Something brushed against my leg, not debris, not rope, something deliberate. My heart pounded as I spun, light sweeping across the void. Nothing, only endless black. But when I turned back, the corpse was closer, its mouth parted, as if exhaling into my mask. My instincts screamed to surface, but the chain had looped around my arm again. I tugged, but it only tightened, cutting into my suit, pulling me toward that open mouth. Panic boiled in my chest as I slashed at it with my dive knife, sawing frantically until the links gave way. The corpse drifted back, still staring, still smiling faintly as though amused. I kicked upward, lungs burning, desperate to escape the crushing dark. But the surface felt miles away, and every flick of my fins only seemed to drag me deeper into silence. When I finally broke into the storm's chaos, gasping, I half expected the chain to follow me. The crew hauled me back, their hands rough, their questions sharp, but when they saw my bandaged hand, when they saw the fresh chain marks now circling higher up my arm, their questions died. The old diver muttered under his breath, words I couldn't catch over the wind, and crossed himself 3 times. No one spoke as I collapsed on the deck, shivering not from cold but from the knowledge that I had broken Rule 7, and worse, I had done it alone. Later, after the storm passed, I sat in the dark cabin, listening to the water slap against the hull. Sleep wouldn't come. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that corpse staring, smiling, holding the locket as if offering it back. I tried to convince myself I had imagined it, that stress and exhaustion had twisted my perception. But the marks on my arm told a different story. They pulsed faintly, red against pale skin, as if the chain had left more than bruises, as if it had left a claim. When dawn finally broke, The sea looked calm again, almost peaceful, but I didn't trust it. I knew now why Rule 7 existed. Night belonged to them, the ones who waited below, the ones who could slip closer when you were alone. I had given them the chance, and they had nearly taken me. The old diver refused to look at me during breakfast, and when the captain finally spoke, his words were flat, final. Next time you won't come back. I wanted to argue, to demand what he meant, but I couldn't. Deep down I already knew. As I walked the deck, staring at the endless horizon, I noticed something that froze me in place. A small wet trail of footprints, leading from the railing to my cabin, bare pale feet pressed into the wood, each step dripping seawater. They ended at my door. My pulse hammered as I approached, hands shaking on the knob. I knew before I opened it what I would find. Inside, resting neatly on my bunk, was the locket. Its chain coiled like a snake, still glistening as though fresh from the sea, and this time it was open. The night after the storm should have been calm, but the ship carried a sickness in the air. The crew moved with tight shoulders, their words clipped, their gazes lingering too long on the horizon. The loss of the youngest diver had left a shadow none of us could shake. His bunk was stripped bare, his name already swallowed by silence. Yet I couldn't erase the image of his arms, pulled downward, vanishing without a trace. By morning, the rules returned to our lives with the weight of inevitability. We gathered in the mess hall, the captain speaking low enough that we leaned in to hear. His eyes swept across each of us, as if measuring who would break next. "We're crossing the shelf tonight," he said, tone flat. "The deep things stir when we pass. You already know the rule. Do not forget it." The old diver, face hollow, repeated it aloud like a prayer. "Rule 8, if you hear knocking beneath the waves, do not answer." The words settled over us like chains. I'd heard sailors speak of strange sounds before, groans of icebergs, echoes of whales, currents slapping the hull, but this was not that. There was an intent in the captain's warning, a suggestion that something would try to make itself known, something that wanted us to acknowledge it. That afternoon I walked the length of the deck, watching the water darken as we drew near the shelf. The sea's surface was glassy, but I could feel pressure rising, as if the ocean itself held its breath. The younger crew members tried to distract themselves with work, but their laughter rang false, hollow, beneath their bravado. Fear gnawed at them. I shared it. My hands shook whenever I reached for a line or touched a railing. The memory of that vanished boy lingered like salt in my lungs. When darkness fell, I locked myself in my cabin, lantern turned low. I tried reading the ship's log, tracing the entries with my finger, but the words blurred into nothing. My thoughts circled the same point again and again. Why a knock? Why a signal shaped like human intention? The ocean was vast, unknowable, but this rule implied something more deliberate, something that could mimic us. I don't know how long I sat there before I felt it. Not sound, not vibration, but a presence pressing against the steel of my cabin wall. The air seemed heavier, as though the room itself leaned toward the sea outside. Instinct told me it wanted recognition, that if I moved closer, I'd sense it more clearly. I gripped the edge of my bunk and stayed perfectly still. The urge to respond was unbearable. It wasn't curiosity, it was compulsion. The thought bloomed in my mind, unbidden. What if it's someone trapped out there? What if they need help? My rational mind knew the impossibility of it, yet the idea grew louder, pushing at me from the inside. The rule existed for a reason. I repeated it silently, again and again, like a barrier against the rising tide of temptation. If you hear knocking beneath the waves, do not answer. Hours passed in a haze. The pressure outside my wall lingered, receded, then returned in steady rhythm, as though whoever, or whatever, it was had endless patience. My lamp sputtered low, shadows rising across the walls. My eyes kept drifting toward the porthole. I swore I could see movement beyond the glass. Not shapes exactly, but distortions, the way light bends around something submerged. I forced myself to look away, heart hammering, jaw clenched so tightly, my teeth ached. At some point exhaustion claimed me. I must have slept, though I don't remember closing my eyes. I woke with the weight of a dream pressing on my chest. In it I stood on the deck, gazing into the water. Below me was a face, blurred, distorted, pale, its mouth opened as though calling, but no sound reached me. Just the impression of need, of pleading. When I jolted awake, my pillow was damp, though whether from sweat or seawater, I could not tell. At breakfast the crew looked as ruined as I felt. Hollow-eyed, silent, they avoided one another's gazes. No one spoke of the night, yet the truth was etched in every face. We had all endured it. We had all felt the pull. The captain addressed us briefly, voice frayed. "You kept the rule. That's the only reason you're here to eat." He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. Later, while coiling rope on deck, I caught the old diver staring at me. His eyes were bloodshot, his lips trembling. When I asked what he'd seen, he shook his head. "Not seen," he whispered. "Felt. It wants us, all of us. But once you answer, it doesn't let go." His voice cracked on the last word, and I realized then how many he must have watched disappear over the years. That night, the weight against my wall returned stronger than before. I sat with the lantern dark, holding the locket in my fist. I didn't open it. I didn't dare. Yet I felt it pulse in time with the pressure outside, as though linked. I wondered if the boy who vanished had carried something too, an object left to draw him nearer to the water's edge. Perhaps each of us bore a lure, hidden until it was time to test us. I whispered the rule to myself until my throat was raw. I fought the urge to respond, to acknowledge, to give even the faintest signal back. And slowly, after what felt like endless hours, the pressure eased. The presence receded into the deep. For now, by dawn, the sea was calm again, the sky bruised pink with sunrise. But I know this isn't over. The ocean is patient. Whatever lives beneath it has all the time in the world, and it knows I am listening. I never answered, but part of me wonders what would have happened if I had. By the time we cleared the shelf, I thought the worst had passed. The ocean calmed, the sky opened, and the crew allowed themselves half smiles over breakfast. But I knew better. The rules never warned us of things that happened once. They warned us of things that kept happening, patterns that waited, traps that tested. The captain gathered us on deck that afternoon. His face looked as weathered as driftwood, but his eyes were sharper than ever. He raised a small vial of something thick and black. "Every ship that's lasted this passage," he said, "obeys this one without question. Rule 9, never mark the water with your blood. Not a cut, not a drop. If it reaches the waves, you won't have long." We stood silent, but I felt the shift among the crew, unease blossoming into fear. Sailors bled, often rusted bolts, cut skin, hooks tore fingers, ropes burned palms raw. But the rule wasn't about injury. The way the captain said it, the weight in his tone, made it clear. The danger wasn't the bleeding. The danger was the ocean knowing. That evening, the old diver sat across from me in the mess, his spoon clinking against the metal bowl with deliberate rhythm. "They smell it," he muttered, "even through steel, even through salt. The moment it touches the surface, they come. And once they've tasted you, it doesn't matter if you're healed, they'll follow." I didn't ask who they were. I'd learned the rules were less about explanation and more about obedience. But his words clung to me like a wet rope, tightening around my ribs. The sea tested us quickly. By mid-morning the next day, one of the younger deckhands, Jiro, barely 20, slipped while tightening a line. The hook caught his forearm, tearing a ragged gash. He cried out, clamping his hand over the wound, as blood pooled between his fingers. We rushed to him, but panic broke out, not at the injury, but at the red drops spattering across the planks. "Lift him," the captain barked, voice thunderous. "Get him below." 2 men seized him, dragging him toward the cabin, while another threw a tarp over the bloodstains. I moved to help, but the captain caught my arm. His grip was iron. "Not the sea," he said. His voice was low, but the meaning burned. "Don't let it reach the sea." That night, the air was thick with unease. Jiro's screams carried through the corridors, muffled but sharp. The medic worked to stitch him, but I could hear the captain pacing outside the sickbay door. Not out of concern, I realized, out of vigilance. He wasn't listening for Jiro. He was listening for the ocean's answer. Sleep was impossible. I sat in my bunk with the lantern low, fingering the locket again, when I heard it. Not sound, not vibration, but an awareness. The same sensation from before, but sharper, more focused. This time it didn't press against my wall. It circled the ship, moving slow, patient, like a shark scenting prey. The next morning, the medic reported Jiro stable, but no one cheered. His skin was pale, his breath shallow, and his eyes darted wildly, as though tracking something none of us could see. At lunch, he whispered to me. They were at the porthole, watching, smiling. I told him not to talk, to rest, but the words chilled me deeper than the ocean spray. He hadn't bled into the water, not directly, but had the ocean still known. By the 3rd day, Jiro was gone. The crew woke to find his bunk empty, sheets damp, the porthole cracked wide. No one spoke of it, but I saw the tarp on deck again, hiding new stains near the railing. I think he'd made it as far as the edge before something reached back. The captain addressed us briefly that morning. His voice was flat, stripped of any human softness. "One life is better than all. Remember the rule," that was all he said, before turning away. The implication was clear. It hadn't been an accident. If the ocean claimed him, it was because his blood had marked its path. Even if not directly spilled, it had called. From then on, the crew carried knives tucked in their belts, not for protection, but as a grim precaution. If anyone bled too much, they'd be given mercy before the ocean scented them. The unspoken law was more terrifying than the rule itself. Death by hand was safer than being taken by the sea. I kept my gloves on at all times, careful with every rope, every splintered rail, but fear sharpens into obsession, and obsession leads to mistakes. One night, while checking the rigging, I felt the sting of a cut across my palm. Small, shallow, barely more than a scratch. But the sight of that single red bead froze me where I stood. The wind whipped, the ship groaned, and I knew if it dripped, if it fell, if the ocean tasted me, I'd never be free. I clamped my fist tight, wrapping it in cloth until my hand ached from the pressure. I didn't tell the captain, I didn't tell anyone. I lay awake all night, convinced the ocean was listening to me breathe. Morning came, but the fear didn't leave. Even now, as I write this by the dim glow of the lantern, I keep glancing at my hand, afraid I'll see the cloth soaked through, afraid I'll see a trail leading from me to the porthole. Rule 9. Never mark the water with your blood. I haven't broken it, not yet, but I don't know how many more nights I can keep the ocean from knowing me. And if it already does, then my story ends the next time I step on deck. The captain gathered us on deck as the sun fell, his silhouette outlined in the bleeding red of twilight. He rarely called meetings at that hour, but his face was carved with something I had not seen before. Not anger, not fatigue, but a wary grief, like a man rehearsing a funeral he knew was coming. The waves around us gleamed in molten light, and he lifted his hand, pointing outward toward the fading line where the sea swallowed the sky. His voice was steady but strained. Rule 10. Never look directly at the horizon after dusk. Not once. Not for curiosity, not for beauty, not even to check your bearings. The horizon is not for us after nightfall. He let the words settle over us like ash. Then he dismissed us without explanation. But I saw the fear in his eyes when one of the younger deckhands asked why. The captain didn't shout, didn't strike, didn't even glare. He only said, "Because once it sees you, you cannot look away. The first night under Rule 10, I thought myself safe. I had always found the horizon dull compared to the crushing depths below us. But there is something about a rule that forbids you so absolutely. It begins to gnaw at your mind, scratching against the softer parts of your curiosity. I lay in my bunk and tried not to imagine it. The shifting line where sea and sky blurred into one another, where day's final glow was swallowed into an ocean of ink. I told myself it was nothing, that the captain was merely layering superstition over fear to keep us disciplined. But when sleep broke and I wandered the passageway, I saw half the crew already sitting in the dark, their backs turned to the portholes, their faces pale and distant. No one spoke. It was not obedience that kept them from looking. It was memory. Something had happened before, long before I joined them. The second night I tested myself. I lingered on deck at dusk, hands braced against the railing, watching the sky bleed into a bruised purple. I told myself I would turn before the line vanished into dark. But the longer I stood there, the more the horizon seemed to swell, as if the sea was not sinking beneath the sky, but rising to consume it. My heart pounded. I knew the moment the last light died, I would not be able to stop myself. I tore my gaze away, staring down at the deck, until the captain's heavy boots approached. His shadow stretched long beside me. "You nearly did it," he muttered. "Another breath, another blink, and it would have had you. Don't make me throw you below next time." There was no anger in him, only warning. By the third night, the ship itself seemed to conspire against us. The lamps flickered low, the portholes rattled, and I heard whispers from the men who couldn't sleep. They said Jiro's bunk was still damp, though the sheets had been burned. They said they had seen shapes balanced on the horizon just before dusk, standing too tall, too thin, their bodies swaying as if made of smoke and bone. One man swore he heard voices calling his name across the line of the sea, each syllable drawn out as though the horizon itself were breathing. The old diver silenced him with a fist against the table. "Don't speak of them," he hissed, "unless you want them to hear you." The mess fell silent. I felt every gaze turn to the floor. It was the fourth night that broke us. A storm had passed, leaving the ship raw and battered, the air heavy with salt and damp wood. We gathered on deck to repair the lines, racing the last of the daylight. One man, exhausted and careless, lifted his head as the sun dipped below the edge. I watched his body seize, his mouth open soundlessly, and his eyes lock forward as if chained to something I couldn't see. I shouted, lunging to pull him down, but the others dragged me back. "Don't touch him," they cried. The sailor stood motionless, staring into the horizon with a reverence that curdled into horror. He whispered something I could not hear, and then he smiled, not with joy, but with surrender. Slowly, deliberately, he climbed the railing and stepped into the waves. He did not thrash. He did not scream. The ocean accepted him as if it had been waiting. After that, we sealed the upper deck at twilight. No one was allowed above. Once the sky began to change, the portholes were covered, the lamps lit low, and the corridors filled with the smell of damp cloth and sweat. But isolation breeds paranoia, and paranoia cracks even the strongest hull. Men whispered that they could feel the horizon pressing against the steel, sliding through the dark like a hand against glass. Others claimed the rule was a lie, a test of loyalty, and that if you looked long enough, you could see the truth of the sea, its real shape, its real face. The captain punished talk like that with silence, locking men in their cabins until dawn, but silence only feeds hunger. One night, I woke to find my cabin door ajar. No one admitted to opening it, yet I knew the latch had been drawn from the inside. The corridor beyond was dark, but through the sliver of the door, I could see the faintest glimmer of blue, not lantern light, not moonlight, something colder, sharper, stretching in a perfect line across the black. My throat went dry, my eyes ached with the pull to look, to drink it in, to see what waited there on the edge of the world. I slammed the door shut and pressed my back against it, shaking until the morning bells rang. Now I sit with my journal, the ink trembling as much as my hand, knowing that Rule 10 is more than superstition. The horizon after dusk is not a line at all. It is a mouth, a threshold, a patient eye watching for those foolish enough to meet its gaze. It does not move toward us. It waits. It always waits. And I fear the day one of us, maybe me, will no longer resist the call, because once you look directly at it, you do not look away. You walk toward it, you vanish into it, and the ship sails on without you, carrying only the memory of another name struck from the ledger, another bunk left damp in the dark. Rule 10. Never look directly at the horizon after dusk. I repeat it to myself, now like a prayer, but prayers mean little when the sea itself is listening. The captain warned us of it, in the same tone he always used, when unveiling another piece of the sea's scripture. Low, deliberate, as though each word carried weight enough to drag a man down. He stood at the helm that night, the lantern light swaying over his weathered face, his eyes refusing to meet the water. Rule 11. Never count the waves after midnight. He spoke it with an edge of bitterness, like a man repeating a vow that had already cost him dearly. One of the younger sailors laughed under his breath, asking why anyone would waste their time with such a thing. The captain didn't answer. He only turned the wheel slightly. His jaw clenched, and we understood the discussion was over. I thought it ridiculous at first. How could waves, endless, shifting, identical, carry danger in numbers? But rules like these linger, festering in the mind, until they no longer sound absurd, but inevitable. At night, when sleep evaded me, and the ship creaked like an old beast in its slumber, I would hear the waves lapping against the hull in steady rhythm. They almost seemed to call for attention, each crest and crash begging to be marked, measured, counted. It is easy to say you won't. Far harder when the darkness stretches forever and the sea drums its endless lullaby against your ears. The first man to break it did so out of boredom. His name was Clem, a wiry, restless sailor who never took warning seriously. One night past midnight, I saw him sitting cross-legged near the stern, whispering to himself as the moon carved silver paths across the water. At first I thought he was singing, but as I drew closer, I realized he was numbering the waves as they rolled past, each syllable soft and eager. 23, 24, 25. His eyes glistened, not with sleep, but with fever. When I told him to stop, he grinned wide, teeth flashing pale, and said, "They're almost in order now. Can't you see it?" I didn't know what he meant, only that his voice quivered with a strange devotion. I dragged him below deck, before the captain could see, but the damage was done. By dawn, Clem was gone. His bunk was empty, his clothes folded neatly, his boots set beside the door as though he had dressed carefully before stepping into the water. The captain didn't ask where he was. He didn't have to. After that, the rule hung over us heavier than before. None of us dared linger above deck when the stars were high, but still, the temptation wormed its way into our skulls. You'd hear the rhythm, steady and endless, as though the ocean itself was trying to speak through numbers. Men stuffed wax into their ears. Others recited prayers until their throats went dry. But sometimes, when exhaustion dulled the mind, you'd find yourself whispering without realizing, your tongue pressing out half a count before you caught yourself and swallowed it back. Each time the terror that followed was worse than anything outside the hull. The whispers spread that the waves were not countless, not random, but arranged. Some said the ocean was trying to reveal its true form, its hidden sequence. Others muttered that the counting was not for us, but for it, that every sailor who gave their numbers away was helping the sea keep its own tally. The thought made my stomach twist. Was the ocean not vast and infinite, but a ledger, keeping record of every soul it had claimed? And if so, how close were we to being added to its sum? One night I woke to find my cabin unnaturally quiet. No creaks, no whispers, no gentle sway, only the faint hiss of water outside the porthole. Against every instinct, I peeked. The sea was smooth, unnervingly still, but as I stared, the faintest ripple broke across its surface. One, then another, then another. My lips parted before I could stop myself, a number crawling unbidden to the edge of my tongue. I bit down hard enough to taste iron, tearing myself from the glass. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next day, the captain pulled me aside. He didn't accuse me, didn't ask what I'd seen, only placed a hand heavy on my shoulder and said, "You stopped in time." Most don't. His eyes were rimmed red with sleeplessness, but there was a flicker of relief in them too. That was when I understood. This rule was not superstition, it was survival. He had watched too many men count their way into the ocean's grasp. Now I write this with the lantern dim, and the ship groaning in its bones, the sea whispering just outside these walls. I tell myself I won't do it, that I won't give it what it wants. But the thought lingers. What if the captain is wrong? What if the counting isn't a trap, but a key? A sequence that unlocks the sea's hidden design? What if every man who vanished hadn't drowned, but stepped through into something beyond the horizon's edge? I can almost hear Clem's voice in the back of my skull, urging me to continue where he left off, to finish the pattern, to see what lies at the end of the numbers. But I won't. I can't. Not yet. So I keep repeating it to myself, the way the captain did, the way we all must. Rule 11. Never count the waves after midnight. Never measure them. Never whisper their tally. Never surrender to the rhythm, because the sea is listening. And the moment you number its children, it begins to number you.